This is a demonstration of how to use the basic debugger features in Xcode. I have my Swift Example 1 application, and my cursor is currently placed on the line of code where I am initializing a variable called name to a string Dale. What I'd like to do in this application is set a breakpoint, that is a stopping point in the code, so that I can step through the code and also inspect the state of the variables that have been set in the code. To set a breakpoint, I go to the gray bar to the left of the code, and right beside the line of code where I want the breakpoint, I click my mouse and I get this blue arrow. This blue arrow states that the code will stop executing at this line. If I hold my control key down and click on the breakpoint, you'll see that I can edit, disable, and delete the breakpoint. If I disable it, it grays out and it doesn't function as a breakpoint. If I hit delete breakpoint, it goes away altogether. So this places a breakpoint on the line of code where I'm going to initialize the name variable. I'm going to execute the application, and it's going to stop on this line. You can see we have a green bar and it says thread 1 breakpoint 1.1 to indicate that this is the current execution point for this line of code. And at this point, var name string equal Dale has not executed. If I go to this set of icons, my debugger icons below the code, and if you can't see this, it can be open and closed using that icon. I am able to use these icons to step through my code. So let's look at these left to right. The first icon, the blue one, will deactivate the breakpoint, so you can turn them all on and off. The next icon will continue program execution from that point, and the program will either continue executing until it hits another breakpoint or continue executing until it reaches the end of the program. The next icon is step over. That is, we'll execute the line of code and step over it. If we were to use the next icon, that's step into. If we are calling a function, we can step into the function and then continue to execute the lines of code in the function, step through those. If I want to execute a function but not go into the lines of code in the function, I can do step over. If I want to go into the function, then I can do step into. And if I'm inside of a function and I want to leave it, I can step out. And the best way to use these, or to learn to use these, is to practice, just play with code and see what they do. So I'm going to step over this line of code, and that line of code now has executed, and the variable name has been set to Dale. Now here I am able to inspect variables, but the variables that I can see are going to be dependent upon a choice I make from this little pop-up menu. And I'm going to go from auto to all variables, registers, globals, and statics. And you'll see here we now have a set of variables that weren't there before, and the variable name is a string and it is set to Dale. If I step over the next line of code, you'll see age change to 24. If I step over that next line of code, value gets set. If I step over the next line of code, Dale is 24 years old gets displayed. If I now am on this for loop and I step over, we're going to go to the print. If I step over it again, we're going to print the first value of I. If I step over it again, I'm going to get the next I, and I can just keep on stepping over and stepping through the for loop until we reach I equals 5, and now my program is outside of the for loop. And if I step over, we'll see some machine language, some assembly language code here, because I've essentially reached the exit point for the application. Let's run this another time. So I'm going to say stop here. It's It's going to run. It's going to stop on my breakpoint. If I set another breakpoint, say on this for loop, and then I go to this icon, which is continue program execution, it's going to continue executing my program until I get to the for loop, at which point then I could continue to step through lines of code, or I could say continue, and it would continue executing the program until I reach the end. So you can set as many breakpoints as you want. If I set them on each of the lines of code and execute this, and I were to say continue execution, it's just going to go from one breakpoint to the next. And here I am iterating through the loop. If I want to turn all those breakpoints off, I could hit this icon and then say continue executing, and I would continue executing until I reach the end of the program. If I want to get rid of these breakpoints, I can hold my control key down and say delete breakpoint. I can drag the breakpoints away, and that gets rid of them. I'm going to set another breakpoint again here on age. I'm going to execute my program. That means the line name of type string equal to Dale has executed, and we can see in the variables here this is the case. If I go over to this box beside where the variables are displayed, there is a place to type, and I can use something called Printout to print out a variable. So I could say PO for printout name, hit enter, and it will display Dale. If I were to say print out age at this point, wanted to switch to something else there, print out age. See, it's selecting the thing from the top of the list. It doesn't know what to do here. It doesn't think maybe age is in scope. Well, we haven't really executed that line of code yet called age. So let me get rid of that, step over age, come over here now and say print out age. And we see this time it was in the list and it works. So even though age was displayed over here and values displayed, these don't really exist until I reach the line of code where they are being executed. That is where they're being declared and initialized to the value. So value is the line we're on. If I say print out value, you see it's not in the list. But if I were to step over that line of code and now say print out value, then we are printing it out. And you'll notice that my 154321 is being assigned to value, which is a double, which means when I print it out, I got a 0.0 on the end of it, indicating that in fact it is not an integer, but it's a double. Speaking of that, let's play with something here. I'm going to stop my code and I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, pay rate. And I'm going to set it equal to 134,000.51. Here's an interesting question. What type is pay rate? Well, one way I can check the type of pay rate is to hold the Option key down, get the question mark, and click on pay rate, and we see that it is a double. By default, a value that has a decimal part is going to be a double. What though if I wanted pay rate to be a float? I could then, after pay rate, put float. And now when I hold the Option key down and click, we see that it's a float, and the float is being initialized to this value. I'm going to move, I grab the breakpoint, move it down to pay rate. I'm going to execute my program. And we'll see that we haven't executed this line that sets pay rate yet. So I'm going to step over that line of code, and you'll see pay rate is listed down here, and it's showing that it is of type float. I'm going to stop my program again, get rid of the specific declaration of the type and let it be inferred from this value, which we know is going to be a double. I'm going to execute my program again with a breakpoint stopping on that line. I'm going to step over, and we see that pay rate here is in fact of type double. So those are, for now, some basic features that allow you to debug an application. Also keep in mind, anytime you see this blue arrow, this is a breakpoint, and it's really pretty easy to accidentally click in this column and add breakpoints. And maybe in one of your early programs, you accidentally click there and you set a breakpoint, you run the application, and your application stops suddenly and you don't know what's going on. You should now know that this means a breakpoint has been set. And if you want to continue the application execution after it stops at a breakpoint, we can continue program execution, or if we want to step through the program, we could just step over lines of code. Remember, down here we can see the state of variables, and over here we kind of have like an interactive terminal to do printout. It'll also be the output for the execution of our program, such as this print statement. And remember that down here we choose what is displayed in this box. If I go to local variables, really only I here is displayed. These other variables, because they're declared outside of any function or any block of code, are really global in scope. And so we had to go down here to get the globals to have those being displayed. And we'll do a little more with debugging a little later when we start to add functions and we start to define scope blocks for our code, such as in functions. But for right now, you should know how to set breakpoints, and you should know how to execute the program with breakpoints on and be able to step through the program, observe the state of variables, observe the movement through the program, and be able to observe the output of the program and then use this kind of terminal area to also print out variables.